everybody, and welcome to Positive Fandom. Welcome to the Burnettwork, and so glad that you're here. I am RM, and tonight we have with us Catherine Cooke. Catherine, how are you tonight?
Good.
Excellent, excellent. Tonight, Catherine and I are going to be looking at a film that really took me by surprise called The Iron Claw. And certainly for some of you out there who have heard about this film and you are into wrestling, I'm sure you've heard that this film was going to be made about this famous wrestling family. And certainly, I think one of the strengths, or at least the main point of the film, was to celebrate the triumph, acknowledge the triumphs, also acknowledge the tragedies they experienced in a respectful way for a mature audience. And Catherine, um, you know, when I first saw the trailer for Iron Claw, I was so excited for this film. It looks like fun. It looks exciting. It has that 80s feel to it, and it has wrestling. Now, honestly, I'm not a huge wrestling fan. I remember wrestlers from the 80s, and what a big deal so many of them were. Roddy Piper, all those guys, Andre the Giant, kind of these legends or wrestlers who felt like they were legendary wrestlers. And it was fascinating, but truthfully, I'm not what you would call a wrestling fan. However, you don't have to be a wrestling fan to understand what's important to this family. Catherine, are you a wrestling fan? And what did you think of the trailer for Iron Claw when you first saw it?
I'm not really a wrestling fan. I don't like that. It's a lot of theater basically, and yeah, all the injuries are real and the hits and everything are real. But they kind of stage and because they write a storyline that they want to follow, and I think it would be kind of cooler with a lot of the moves that you see in there if they would let the outcomes of the matches be genuine and let that dictate the direction the storyline goes. Then I would probably be more interested rather than kind of because they talk about it in this movie how if you want to get to the top, it's not that they write your whole career for you. It's like first you have to prove that you are a good wrestler, and they decide how that kind of goes along. But certain personalities like Roddy Piper, he was really cool. He was also an actor in other films. He was great. And Andre the Giant, of course, awesome. And then you're familiar with people that you know just because of how big their celebrity status has gotten. But even today, I don't watch it. I'm not. It's not something in my wheelhouse.
Well, the same for me. And however, I'm sure you feel the same way. I'm not denying the importance of wrestling internationally in foreign countries, and many of our modern entertainers, either in action or, as you stated, for Roddy Piper, their entertainment careers also come into play. Many of them are playing roles in movies or in voiceover work.
Of course, Dwayne Johnson being probably the biggest one to make a turnaround from wrestling to Hollywood and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And, I think it is really interesting that this film kind of starts off, we have these major stars. Zac Efron is a big star. So you recognize him right away. And the look that these young athletes have in this family is very unique. Most of them are over 6 feet tall. They're very muscular. Zac was going to have to bulk up for this. I'm not saying that Zac was ever a skinny person or didn't have the physique for this, but Catherine, what do you think about the preparation, at least in regard to the actors for playing wrestlers? I feel like they hit the mark very well.
They did. It was pretty crazy whatever they did to get to look like that, especially when you look at the last movie he was in versus now. Because I don't know the filming schedule exactly, but yeah, he really like all of them kind of beefed up for these roles.
Yeah, and certainly, we have no choice but to look at it. I don't think it's the kind of environment or even the kind of film that people would be satisfied if we saw a film where actors, just were of a regular physique. It had to be over the top. And if I could say anything about the effort that they put in to create this reality of this family in the 1980s, gee, Catherine, it was like stepping right into their lives. And honestly, I don't know about you, but it's clear that we knew that some of the major themes they were going to visit in this would have been that, unfortunately, and some people have been looking at this, that some wrestlers are dying very young, and kind of looking at that. And the second theme is sort of this exposure to drug usage, if you will, or even using, let's say, different types of enhancers. But honestly, it starts off very fun. This film feels like you're going to a wrestling match. You see this family, they're heavily involved in this. All the boys have this pressure that's put on them to perform, to be excellent. And it's such a cool depiction. There's this excitement, they're going, you're kind of in the 80s, but then it gets heavier and heavier and heavier in a way I wasn't expecting. Yes, I knew that the family had tragedy, but what did you think about this type of treatment in the script where it does kind of start off rather celebratory and then you have this heaviness? Catherine, this film was not for the faint of heart.
Well, it starts out saying that it's inspired by a true story rather than based on true stories. They did make a hell of a lot of changes to the true story. But I thought the first scene was more intense than it was fun, because you start with that black and white scene with the wrestling match where the father, played by Holt Meckel, he's in the ring and he's taking it like way too far, and the referee's trying to get him to stop and he won't. You see him do the signature iron claw move with his hand, practically beating down on this guy. It's like, geez, is he gonna like really hurt him, or is he? And then he gets almost disqualified from it, and he leaves. But then he goes right outside, and his kids are there, Kevin and David, and he's they're like, oh hey kids, and he's picking them up and everything, and it's great. And they start walking out to the new car that he's got with the trailer on it. And initially my heart sank when I saw that, because I knew that the first son, who's not in the movie, was a 6-year-old who died by a freak accident involving the trailer hitch in the back of the car. And because this is like a cold, early scene, probably because I didn't remember the original kid's name at first, so I thought, oh god, is this one of those kids? Is he gonna get killed right now? Fortunately, that didn't happen, but I was like on the my heart was kind of racing because I thought something horrible was about to happen. But then it flashes forward to Zac Efron and the others, and they do eventually acknowledge at some point in the film that first son and how they think it's a curse, that the family curse, that we should have changed our names, and it's silly stuff that the Zac Efron character comes to believe in. But I didn't think it was so much for me. The faint of heart could handle it. I mean, it's a tragedy, but it's not like super violent type stuff. It's not dark, other than that really opening wrestling match, which seemed really intense because the father was taking it way too far. I didn't think the other matches were as intense. They felt almost more like ballet, like really nice choreographed moves, especially when you see the tag teams where they all go in and knock them down like in sync with each other. Like that was really cool. But you see all the training and stuff that really goes into it, and that was pretty hardcore.
It really was hardcore, Catherine. And certainly, I think, when we're presented with a situation where there's this man who's doing this wrestling, and we kind of find out later on that he was, so supposedly robbed from another career and he ended up becoming a wrestler. It wasn't sort of like his first choice. And he tells his wife the reason why he has this car is because he has to appear successful. And that's very important when it comes to wrestling, the appearance of everything. I thought that was very interesting because there's a lot about in the film where there's pressure on the boys to appear to be perfect and, kind of this shake it off attitude that we've all heard of before. I think it is kind of interesting. One of the sons, Kevin, wants to talk to his mother and he wants to ask her, can you please handle this problem? And she is like, well, I don't handle that. I think it was interesting about once we saw that she didn't want to interfere. She didn't necessarily want to get her, too much into politics in the family, was this idea of like, is that how things would be handled in this family? And I think it was very interesting because we've all seen situations like this where someone is asking for help and they're like, well, I really can't get involved in that.
Well, yeah, because she doesn't want to get involved with the whole wrestling thing. It's like, yes, she understand, like they say at one point, oh yeah, his dad's as stubborn as a mule. Like even his colleagues will say that. And so when Kevin wants her to tell dad to go easier on Michael, because Michael is of course an aspiring musician, he doesn't really want to wrestle, but he kind of does it every once in a while to please his dad, which is why he's like, and to go easy on David is actually, yeah, it was David he wanted to go easy on. Never mind, that's not the musician, that was Michael. But he's like, can you tell him to go easy on David stuff? This is getting kind of ridiculous. And easy on Mike and stuff, and she just doesn't want to get involved in the whole wrestling thing because she knows that's their bread and butter. that's what their family is. Like the father was got a football scholarship and ended up pursuing wrestling instead. And he's this is what the family is made for. This is what we're doing. And she knows that that's the one thing she's not going to get in the way of, which is kind of interesting considering that this whole family is very much in with like wrestling's their thing. And yet she doesn't want to have any real involvement in it and getting in the way of it, which I thought was kind of interesting. Like it'd be one thing if you treat just your job or if it was just a hobby and like, yeah, go on easy on the kids. But she's like, nope, they're treating this as like this is what the father just expects of all his sons. You're going to follow me into wrestling. And it's very much the idea that, yes, he was a successful wrestler in his time, but he didn't reach the peaks that he wanted to reach in his career. So he's going to live that dream through his sons. And certainly we've heard of other people, plenty of other real world examples of that happening where the parents try and push the kids to be the stars because they want to, live through them type of thing. And that's very much what's going on here, which is why the mom seems to not want to get involved. She's like, no, this is your father's thing. This is his one passion in life, and it's brought us this wonderful house, this big ranch, and all that. And nope, I'm not getting involved. You guys you're the wrestling guy. You guys just deal with it, man up. And that's kind of her. She says it nicer than that, but that's kind of the essence of what she's saying.
Absolutely, Catherine. And I think it is also very interesting how we start off also realizing that there's this order of importance of the family. And of course, it's tied to whoever performs best in the arena. But then we also get this experience where we can see one of the young men is very talented and he's a discus thrower. This is an Olympic sport we're talking about. All of a sudden, you get the sense of, gee, if these boys aren't wrestlers, let's say, or, if they were given the right opportunity or the circumstances were correct, maybe all of them could go to the Olympics. They certainly show they're very talented athletically. And I think that you probably could say that boycotting of the Olympics, I guess it was in 1980, affected a lot of people. I mean, it was completely out of their, control what happened. But what we're noticing in the film, and I think it first, it starts out very subtle. When Carrie realizes that he can't go to the Olympics, like, he's at some sort of Olympic training place and everything's going great. He's great form. You can see it looks great. And hearing the news around the television, he just must have been devastated, but there's no way for him to even talk about it to anybody. He comes home and like the father's like, well, you got your dream robbed from you and I got my dream robbed from me. And, it was incredibly sad. And I'm thinking to myself, has anybody really talked to him about this? Because this just must have shattered him, knowing his potential as an athlete, but it was something he had absolutely no control over. And the film does talk about this curse, or at least this idea that Kevin and maybe some of the other family members feel like there's a curse in the family, which after watching it, I don't believe that there's a curse, but he does feel that there are a lot of unfortunate things that happen to him. But I think it is funny, or at least unusual, how it does create this odd sense of unfairness towards Carrie in particular, in a way, because unless you knew that we had boycotted the Olympics in the 1980s, you wouldn't know that. And perhaps this is the first time you're ever hearing of it, but it was big sports news at the time. Thousands of athletes were affected by that boycott. I think, nobody talks about it after the father, kind of pats him on the back and says, that's all right, you're going to wrestling. What did you think about that treatment? Because I imagine maybe that is how that went down in that particular case.
Well, it's kind of like my understanding of it is that the father didn't so much get robbed of his football dreams. Like, yes, he got the football scholarship, but just because you get the scholarship doesn't mean you're going to be great enough to be on the front line all the time. Or, kind of like when you make it to baseball, you might just end up in AAA forever and not make it to the major. And so it was kind of like that. So it's not so much that the father got robbed. It's that it's like you're talented, but he wasn't going to become the big football star. And so he's kind of imagining that, oh, that's been taken away from me. It's been robbed. So I'm going to, go into wrestling and all this and be really aggressive. Whereas with Carrie, it actually was robbed from him. And we see that when you see the family, you could practically cut the tension with a butter knife, where it seems the other boys and the mother are devastated while they're watching, whereas the father looks like he's about to, like a raging bull, just knock that TV over because he's so angry about how, politics are seizing this from his son. And so when Carrie comes home, yeah, he lets him hang out for a while. And then he's like, I want you to join your brothers in the ring. And it's like, is this really about you thinking he's going to be a good wrestler? Is this about you just being obsessed with pushing them all to greatness? Because at the end of the one tag team wrestling match, he does take the mic and he's like, "We're gonna be the greatest wrestling family in the history of wrestling," and he's really worked up about it because he's just obsessed with being the best. Like he just wants that championship belt, the heavyweight champion belt. And so it's like, okay, you're clearly living this dream through your kids, and because Carrie is completely in perfect shape, having been working out for the Olympics and everything, and now that it's been taken from him, he's like, no, you need to take advantage of this right now. Don't give up the training. Just train for something else. Be a wrestler. And initially, Kevin's excited because Carrie's clearly got the physique and he's got the interest, and so they hit it off. And initially, it's really great, and in the way he thanks his father for it, yes sir, all that kind of thing. But at first, it seems that Carrie does genuinely enjoy it. He takes to it rather well. Because they don't talk about it in the movie, but he won a lot of different types of championships, and because he was wrestling for many years, because the accident that you guys we'll get to when we get there didn't happen until 6 years after he started entering professional wrestling. So he did have kind of 6 years isn't a long time for wrestling, but it's pretty good. So yeah, he took to it really naturally, and it seemed to satisfy at least a bit, having lost the Olympic dream.
Absolutely. And I just want to say hello to Daniel Berry, Sports Highlights. Hello, Daniel Berry. Good to see you, as well as Derek Seven, who says, I like the film. It's so tragic. I don't think I'll see it again. I understand, Derek, but you got to see it. Dan Candy says, I grew up in Dallas and lived the Von Erich story in real time. I went to the Sportatorium. Wow. All the time as a kid. The recreation was scary good. Wow.
Yeah, that's even what Kevin said. He made his first public appearance in 20 years to be at the premiere, and he's like, they did a really good job training those guys, and the moves, he said, was more realistic than what you see in most wrestling movies. He was very impressed by it.
Yeah, and we can kind of see a little bit of the camaraderie here, even in this photograph of the actors who are portraying the brothers, with Carrie, who's up on the right-hand side on the fence, and he's kind of grasping onto the young actor who plays Mike. Mike is another character who, a brother who has this ability, this musical ability. It seems like these boys have so much talent, Catherine. What an incredible family, what an incredible group of young men. But they do have pressures on them from the father, as well as society, to do this activity. And in some cases, it really is pushed on them, as you said, Catherine, and they don't have necessarily a choice in the matter. But David, one of the brothers, wants to be, he's a talented musician, and he starts playing, and I think it's really interesting because, as you said, the father takes a moment to talk about how the family is going to be the greatest family in the history of wrestling, and this idea, this pride in keeping everything alive, and being proud of this. I think it's really interesting because they very subtly show us different things that are happening. For example, there's a scene where we see it's a steroid injection. I'm assuming it's a steroid injection, but it's not they're not putting in things that we expect to see in a very cliche kind of way. It's kind of like you see somebody doing something almost as if you walked in the room and found them doing it, not sort of like as a clinical doctor would put gloves on and like take out the vial. This was very different, and I enjoyed that so much because that's the reality of what would be done in that manner. And even despite all of those things that they were doing, they still were incredible athletes. So I did want to mention that. And interestingly enough, the three of the brothers seem to be the ones who are kind of like have their careers in line, and the father really kind of does this coin flip, Catherine, of deciding who gets to go, when I guess I thought that it would have been more or less Kevin who would be the one who would be chosen to go as the
coin. Well, the coin flip happened after after David had after they were trying to figure out like who's going to be the one, because he initially, it's not the coin flip. He announces in the ring when he says we're going to be the greatest family. He just spontaneously tells the announcer that it's going to be David, And you see David there kind of reacting kind of nervously because he thought it was going to be Kevin. Everybody thought it was going to be Kevin. And then when the boys are kind of looking like this, the father immediately turns around. It's like, you need a problem with that? And like, no. And, they're kind of, afraid of it. And it's not until after David dies of the ruptured intestine that, because that big title match was a week away with Ric Flair, the very night practically after the funeral, the father's talking about how people will judge us how we deal with adversity, and trying to sell it like it's a big thing. It's like, dude, your son just died in a horrible tragedy, and you're more concerned about getting that belt because he's never had it and he has his chance and he wants it so bad. And that's when he figures he'll just flip the coin, even though both Kevin and Carrie say they're ready to take it. And it's like, it was kind of surreal watching it, because who knows if there was an actual coin flip about this. I don't know if there was or not. But it's, again, you've just buried your son, and it's literally, he died less than a week before this, at least according to the film's timeline, and the most you can think about is, we need to get that belt. And it's like, it was kind of crazy to like, God, you have to see it to believe it almost, And I did like these scenes here too, where they show you how they film these little promos, and they take, they keep shooting them over and over again. That was kind of neat. But man, the coin flip, and just, really, that's your concern right now, getting the belt? And how he didn't. Well, he's like, oh, there better not be any crying at this funeral type of thing, getting really, super tough about it type thing. I was like, oh, geez.
Yeah, and I think it is, we do see, and I kind of am going a little bit faster than I should going through it, but to be honest with you, Kevin gets noticed by all the girls who are going to the sportatorium. It's not a surprise. He meets this lovely girl, and they hit it off, and they get married. And essentially, I almost thought that the reason why he wasn't picked to go to Japan too was because he had just gotten married, and maybe he didn't want to leave the country or whatever. But it turns out that his brother David goes to Japan. He's going to be the one who's going to be going on a tour in this story, and he's not well at some point, I guess, but he's still going to go on this tour, and it seems like everything's going to be fine, only for Kevin and, of course, the audience to find out that David has died in Japan from enteritis.
Yeah.
And
yeah, and I don't know if in reality there were warning signs beforehand, because in the movie they get pretty explicit. He's vomiting up quite a lot of blood in the bathroom, and Kevin's like, look, you need to go see a doctor about this right now. And David's like, no, I have this schedule. I have to keep to it. It'll be fine. I'm just going to go to Japan, do this match, and then the Ric Flair thing next week, and it'll be fine. And it's like, that's really, and again, who knows if there was warning signs beforehand or not, but because for a while, as I understand it, there was a bit of a mystery. People were wondering what actually killed him, so it took a while to find out. But that was, again, the movie's kind of framing it almost like he feels pressured by his dad. He doesn't want to take the time off to go to the doctor or something. And that's kind of what the movie pushes a lot, is that it's all the dad. And it's true that Kevin said that Holt McElhaney did a good job accurately portraying his father the way he was. But because of the changes they made in the film, it's debatable if you could put as much of the blame on his shoulders. And like, I don't think as much as, say, the film suggests. But yeah, it was a real shock to everybody when David was just, gone. And how the father's just sitting there at the table, and Kevin's like, Dad, what's wrong? And he just tells him, and the dad's kind of quiet about it, but you could tell he's not really letting it hit him very much, before they again go to the funeral. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was a shock to hear. And I want to just read the super chat by Alexander Wilson. Thank you so much for the $10 super chat. I so appreciate it. Alexander says, as a huge pro wrestling fan, this film was disappointing. The Ric Flair portrayal was awful, and they didn't talk about their drug abuse that really caused a lot of pain. Mm-hmm. They left a lot out of it. Yeah, well, wow, thank you for sharing your feelings about the film.
And I think that's why they changed it to, instead of saying based on a true story, it says this is inspired by a true story, which I thought, if you're going to make that many changes, why are you even calling it the Von Erich? You could change it at that point, because it is true that, unlike in the film where they make it seem like Carrie's suicide was a bit cut and dry, that he got in the motorcycle accident, it resulted in amputation, which it did not result in immediately. But in the movie, they say, oh, it resulted in amputation, and he became bitter because he couldn't perform as much in the ring, and oh, it's a lot of pain. I don't want to live like this, being a freak, blah blah. And then he offs himself, and that's not really what happened. It's like, yeah, he got in the motorcycle accident in 1986. He tried to walk on the foot again prematurely, which caused it to fall apart even more, and that's what caused the amputation. And he got, addicted to painkillers, and then when you run out of those, you get addicted to other drugs that caused arrest, drug-related arrests and stuff like that. And one time he got arrested for violating probation and was going to be in for probably a little bit of a lengthy jail sentence. And again, so then you're dealing with the jail time, you're dealing with the addiction, and you're dealing with the fact that you're kind of over the hill for your wrestling career, because his career did continue when he did have the prosthesis on. Even Roddy Piper said that Roddy Piper wrote in his autobiography that he felt comfortable enough taking the prosthesis off in the hotel room to talk to him, but that other people, he would still wear it even in the showers to try and disguise the fact that he even had one, because he didn't want people to know that he had gotten that bad where he had it amputated. He was kind of, I guess, apparently self-conscious about it. But it was really, again, like Alexander says, it was a lot of the drug use and stuff that played into that. It wasn't as simple as, oh, I just want to get back into wrestling. I feel like a freak because I lost my foot. Oh, I'm gonna off my. It's like, no. I mean, the acting was really good, and the way they sell it and that's why I was mentioning earlier that the movie almost puts too much blame on the father's shoulders. It's like, yeah, the dad's pushing him really hard. He's pressuring him. He wants to kind of live the life that he didn't get through his kids, but that's not the sole reason that these things happened, as the
Yeah.
film suggests.
And that's such a good point. And once again, thank you, Alexander, for the super chat. And it is something that can't be ignored because their physiques are, as I said, so extreme that one would question that. Even Zac Efron's face, like, it's so interesting to see how it sort of in the beginning of the film, he starts off where he is kind of smiling, but then a lot of his face is just become so rigid, and it's almost as if he can't smile. I think it's very interesting because obviously these physiques are enhanced by steroids, but as I said, they didn't necessarily show us or have them talk about what they were doing. So you're right about that, Alexander and Catherine. Also, Justapose, hello, Justapose says, Chavo Guerrero trained them and put together the wrestling scenes in the film, I believe. Well,
Yes.
that is impressive. Thank you so much for letting us know that. It showed because it looked like authentic wrestling that I've seen on TV. And I think what's also interesting is that there's another brother, goodness gracious, who also finds himself kind of forced and kind of trapped. Mike thought he was going to be this musician, and you got the sense that he had talent. And we find out that the father was trained in clarinet, and it looked very different for what might happen for him. But I think for a person, who is an adult, would realize what was going to happen to Mike. And even he is in a situation where he is pressured, this enormous pressure to still go in the ring. He has this accident, he injures his shoulder, and he ends up in the hospital with complications. Catherine, this also was something that was difficult to watch in a sense, because the film is constantly getting heavier and heavier, as I mentioned. What do you think about the portrayal, especially after he gets out of the hospital, where he isn't the same person?
Well, it's interesting because he got toxic shock syndrome from that, which is a very rare type of complication to get from it. And they're doing the press conference at the hospital, and one of the reporters asked if he'll get back into wrestling, and he's like, Michael's trying to answer the question, saying yes, and Kevin's like, oh yes, absolutely. But you see the father standing in the hallway, and he kind of, like, even the dad knows that's not going to happen. That dream that he has for Michael is not going to succeed. And if the father is shown to have any regret over pushing him into it, who knows? And this is another thing the film oversimplified, where yes, Michael was having problems, obviously recovering, and he did tell his mother at some point that he did feel a lot of pressure to replace David. He said, I can't be the new David. But that wasn't the only reason. It was like, again, the struggles with coming back from that injury, the prognosis not necessarily being that great, and then getting, taking more drugs to try and deal with it. And that's eventually what led to his suicide. It wasn't solely because, oh, I'm feeling a lot of pressure to live up to him and I can't because now this has happened to me. It was, really a lot of depression and stuff, and drugs from the aftermath of that whole thing. Because you could tell that, like, he's trying to speak, but he really can't. He's really rigid. His muscle, it had a real devastating effect on him. But, again, because it's inspired by a true story, they're kind of making it seem more like, oh, this is the father's fault for pushing him into it, and making him feel like he should still have to live up to David even after this. And it's like, no, not entirely. But it was
Yeah.
still really sad.
It really was sad, and I think they did a good job of demonstrating this tragedy that this family has had to deal with. And I think also, you know, as we're watching the story unfold, they continue to not put in cliche style scenes. There's a scene where, unfortunately, I can't remember the guy's name, Carrie, um, also, ends up committing suicide. So you have two brothers who have committed suicide, and Kevin feels quite alone after this. I think he himself has distanced himself from his wife and child. Even though seems like he has a successful marriage, he's not able to reach out to his wife and have this normal relationship that a husband would have with a wife. And so we see him spending a lot of time away from her. And he even says things like, well, I don't want the kids to catch what I have. And it's a lot of low self-esteem, Catherine.
But he's getting really superstitious about it, so much so that he even decides that his kids are going to go by their original family birth name, Atkinson, and not Von Erich. And she's like, come on, that's ridiculous. There's no actual curse. It's like, yes, your brother Jack, it was a freak accident before you guys were even, the rest of the brothers even been born yet. David, it was a health emergency that happened. Michael, again, yeah, it seems that way when you start layering, especially when you factor Chris into it, who's not in the movie. But it's like he was, in a sense, getting really paranoid about it and wanting to distance himself, almost like he expected something bad to happen to him, and he just didn't want that to, have an effect on his wife and kids, so he's staying away from them. And certainly if they had included Chris in the story as well, what happened, you'll be like, oh, geez, I can totally get it now even more, just how crazy that was. Because, Chris was the other brother who, I can't remember what condition he had, but he was prescribed prednisone for it. And that's not something you're supposed to take chronically. But whatever doctor he had at the time was prescribing it. He was taking it all the time. And the side effect was that it makes your bones really brittle. So he couldn't even perform basic wrestling moves. And he still wanted to wrestle. His dad likewise knew that this was not going to be a logical dream for him. He can't really be a wrestler. But it's almost like he felt excluded from the family and wanted to get involved in wrestling. And other people at the sportatorium, they knew kind of what was going on with him, but they'd still cheer him on and they still liked him. But it was also just, the injuries that he was getting all the time just from that condition, that he just didn't want to live like that anymore. And he killed himself after Michael, but before Carrie. And it was incredibly sad because Kevin had told him, look, don't hurt yourself tonight, because he had thoughts about it. He's like, oh, I promise I won't. And then he does anyway, shooting himself outside. But they excluded that from the film because the director thought it would make the movie too long, which I kind of disagree with. I think at most, most of these brothers share scenes together. He would just be in the scenes occupying the same space, and maybe another 10 or 12 minutes of screen time for him, which is actually a lot when you think about it. And maybe thought people wouldn't actually believe the story at that point. If you told them that, they might, like, people who didn't know better would think, oh, this can't be true. It's too much, But, and yeah, it's kind of weird that for a kid who felt kind of excluded from the family, the whole family business, to be excluded from the movie about the family. I mean, he does get a shout out at the end of the credits when they say, the dedications, this film is dedicated to Jack, David, Mike, Chris, and Carrie. But it's like, yeah, when you layer that level of tragedy on top, it's like maybe they thought the audience ultimately wasn't going to buy it, so he's not in it either. But again, that was not so much him being pressured by his dad either, so much as it was just that condition and those injuries, always breaking your bones all the time. It's like, God, I can't imagine anybody would want to live like that. So that was crazy. And you just see how Kevin's just getting, like you mentioned, he looks rigid, and it's not just the steroid use, which you're right, they should have gone into that more, because there are a hell of a lot of wrestlers who die very young. There's a lengthy list of them. But he almost gets more rigid, like you mentioned, like emotionally and socially throughout the movie, because he's just so paranoid that this curse might actually be real. And yeah, eventually they do win the title belt, and I was expecting there to be a scene where the father where one of the sons would like hand it to the father and he would be like so proud, and they don't really have that, which I was kind of surprised by because that's clearly what the dad has been pushing for this whole time. And you see how that relationship is kind of deteriorating, where they don't have the scene where he announces to his son that I'm going to give you the sportatorium and our wrestling division. It's just they're like watching TV one day, and he's like finds out that his son is saying, "Hey, maybe I could sell this." He's like, "I didn't give this to you to sell it. If you even think about that, you better walk out that door and never come back." And it's like, oh, geez, you know. Um,
Yeah,
and I was surprised because he didn't. Didn't seem like the father couldn't still run that aspect of the business. He just kind of gave it to Kevin at some point, and they didn't say when or why. And yet he's so afraid. It just doesn't want him to sell it because like this is our legacy. This is our corner of the ring, so to speak, and you don't touch that.
Yeah, and it was interesting too because I almost feel as if the father felt that the son's winning the belt was expected. So it wasn't necessarily an accomplishment. It was like, of course you're going to win that. If you can't do that, then almost like what good are you? And of course, this scene shows Kevin holding up the belt, but let's say for all practical purposes in this film, he doesn't get it because he gets disqualified for using, of all things, this iron claw hold. And I think it's interesting because we see Kevin doing a lot of fights in the ring where someone comes in, and there's one scene where his brother comes in and helps him. Then there's this scene where he gets disqualified. And then we even see a scene where Kevin is waiting for somebody to tag him in, and they won't tag him in. And, I kind of feel like, just in the sense of what they're showing you, Kevin, it's almost like Kevin becomes persona non grata. What do you think about that, Catherine?
Uh, kind of. I mean, I can't remember which one it was that he was partnered with that they wouldn't tag him in, but it's like, yeah, because like even early in the movie when he gets thrown out of the ring onto the concrete, and the dad's kind of upset with him for not jumping back in immediately, and he scolds him for it afterwards, and he's like, "Well, Dad, that was really hard. That was concrete." And then you're seeing again his personality starting to erode as he's getting paranoid about this curse and something going to happen to him. And I guess the idea is it may have been having an effect on his wrestling, and maybe that's the implication of why he's not getting tagged in or something. Uh, Unless that was Kerry who wouldn't tag him in when he was trying to get back in the ring. It was kind of, I wasn't really sure about it. It's like, yeah, he's not getting tagged in. He's kind of, disappointed. But you're right. The dad just kind of expected the ring is, or the belt is something that was going to happen eventually. And, but come hell or high water, we're getting that belt, and it's going to happen whichever one of you is going to get it. Like even when he announces that all of his sons are going to be heavyweight champions, and even Michael was like, "What?" He's getting really nervous about it.
Yeah, it's like, somebody makes an announcement, sort of a blanket announcement like that, and you're like, wait a minute, I don't know if I can do that. And that's a very good point. And that's what makes the gun scene so odd to me, in a sense, because I almost felt like that, why that scene in the film? However, once again, it's this notion of, it in opposed to saying that he was handling it inappropriately, they used the premise of saying that he was trying to give it to the father before you were supposed to give it to him. The mother's like, "No, we only give gifts on Christmas Day. You have to wait for your gift." And it was almost as if that was, rather than saying, "Why are you flinging this gun around? It's dangerous. It can go off, and you shouldn't be holding a gun right now." So they chose to, at least that's my interpretation of it. I don't know if that's what actually happened, but I'm guessing from the way that the film has been presented that that was used in order to present, the opportunity for him to have a gun in the first place. Then he's giving it as a gift, and it's Christmas time. But it also felt very awkward. What an awkward moment, Catherine, because the first thing that I thought was not necessarily that he shouldn't be handling a gun. It's just that it feels like it came out of nowhere. And, I wondered if it could have been done a little bit differently, handled a little bit differently, especially since that's the vehicle he uses to take his own life. What did you think, Catherine?
Well, it was a bit odd because he shows up with his fiancee or his girl or his wife or whoever it is, and he's just immediately getting all upset that the dad won't fire the gun. He's putting it in the gun case, and and the father's remaining calm, and then Kevin tries to calm Carrie down, like, dude, what's the problem? And they're like, we gotta leave. We got good discount tickets to go to Mexico for Christmas or whatever. And he's just really hopped up on everything. And you could tell that he's dealing with something bad, because he does eventually call Kevin later on and from the hotel, saying that he's really not feeling good. I'm freaking out, type of thing. And so it's almost like Carrie feels that winning the belt for his dad wasn't enough. Like, the dad still doesn't show the appreciation or whatever, so he decided to buy him a gun, because he's got the whole gun case, big Texas ranch, and all that. I'm going to buy you this really big, kind of revolver, and I want you to fire it. And apparently it's tradition, I guess, that you're supposed to fire the gun. And the father just kind of says thanks and just puts it in the gun cabinet. He doesn't really seem to appreciate it, and that's kind of what's seems to be upsetting Carrie, because in the movie they make it sound like he got in the motorcycle accident while he was trying to come down off the high of having literally just won the belt. And so it's like, oh, you won the belt, but this happened, and since you can't continue wrestling yet, the father's not interested anymore. Almost like he dropped you like a rock. And it's like he's trying to earn the father's respect and appreciation back by giving him what he believes is a very special gift and significant to him. And the dad just kind of brushes it aside. And even though the father's right to try and calm him down, it's like you could tell that that's kind of what Carrie's doing. He's trying to get feedback from the dad. It's like, really? David died, you immediately want to go to the belt? Well, now I've got you that belt. And then you just dropped me the minute I had the accident and moved on to try and groom Michael for this. And look what happened to him. And now I'm giving you a gift to try and get something out of you. And you're not responding. They're not getting anything from the dad, because he's like, even the guy that Kevin eventually sells the sportatorium to says, yeah, your dad invited me down to the ranch to intimidate me into not selling. He's like, yeah, he's stubborn as a mule, stubborn ass, always has been. And so that's how I took that scene with Carrie. He was trying to get appreciation or some type of connection with the dad, and he just wasn't getting it.
Yeah, and it was a very interesting approach to go there with that. But of course, we see another tragedy, and somehow Kevin becomes more of the center of this one, because he gets, they decide to have where he has a phone call from Carrie, and he has to deal with that. And I'm like, that's quite a lot for someone to deal with. But I almost felt as if, and this may not be true, but they decided to put in what this incredible, I guess, I guess you could call it like a dream sequence or after sequence when Carrie, passes away, and he sees his brothers. And it kind of simultaneously ties in where Kevin is almost able to kind of let go for the first time, where he's able to, finally deal with these emotions that he's dealing with, which are incredibly intense, incredibly strong. And he hasn't been dealing with it. His wife has been saying, you can talk to me, and he's ignoring them. He's ignoring a lot of people. It was almost as if it was the moment for an emotional release. And we do actually see that emotional release on the screen when, Kevin is with his sons and he's crying, and, the children are, saying, Daddy, why are you crying? What did you think about that? Was it, I almost was thinking that the intention was for you to kind of cry along with this, because it felt,
because it's like that whole climax is, Carrie, he's feeling, it's almost like because he hasn't gotten, the movie's almost framing it to seem like because he hasn't really gotten any feedback or anything back from his dad, like he did this for him and all of this stuff. Like, even I could imagine that maybe discus throwing wasn't necessarily his dream. It's just that he was good at it and his dad was pushing him because he had an opportunity to get an Olympic medal. And
right.
So once that was taken, oh, I'm going to push you to get the belt because that's what I want. And he's like, he's done all this that he feels. And it's like, wow, by this point in 1991, I believe it was, or 93, I think he'd already invested like, over a decade, like 15 years practically in this whole, pro athlete type thing. And it's like, yeah, he won a lot of championships and stuff as a wrestler, but it's almost like he didn't feel like the movie makes it seem like that's not really what he was after. He was after the stronger bond with his brothers and his father that he just wasn't getting. And he goes back to he goes back to the house, and like Kevin tells his dad, you watch him, he's coming, make sure you watch him. And the movie makes it, in reality, he did shoot himself somewhere further out on the property. They didn't hear it or see it happen when it did. But in the movie, they want to make the point that the whole climax is Kevin or somebody finally stepping up to the father and confronting him about this. And he knocks the dad on the ground and puts him in a chokehold. and is practically strangling him, saying, I told you to watch him. I told you to watch him. And just getting as close as he can come to just literally saying, all you ever cared about was just us winning all these titles, and you didn't really care about us. Like, if you cared about Michael, you would have respected he wanted to be a musician, and maybe if you'd actually come to some of his gigs, you'd see he was actually good at it and could have made something out of it. But no, you wanted to push this, and so you have that really dramatic scene where he's just, and they follow it up with that, that afterlife scene where the brothers are meeting, and then he gets to meet his young brother, 6-year-old brother Jack, for the first time, and it's such a sweet scene because the way they stage it, it's almost like they're completely free of all the pressures of everything that was going on, and all the, all that strain, and they're just able to be at peace. And so Kevin is just left now alone with nobody because his relationship with his dad is pretty much broken at this point. Even the mother goes back to painting, and the dad just walks in the house, and he's like, so what are you doing? I'm painting. So what's for dinner? I didn't really think about it, because she's like so broken. She's just going back to her old passion of painting. Whereas all he can think about is, oh, what are we gonna have for dinner? Like, it's like, dude, 5 of your sons have predeceased you. 4 of them within the 3 of them within the last 2 years, and then the fourth, David, a couple years before then. And you're still kind of nonchalant, like it's not a big thing because it was all about them. And it's interesting how the camera's kind of hidden in the hallway, and they don't show her while she's painting. We know what she's doing, and we see him standing. Oh, it's gone, and it's like, oh my god, this guy is still like this. And so Kevin is just left, of course, completely depressed because all his brothers are gone. Doesn't feel like he really has a father anymore, and that's why it was so touching when the kids come up and say, "Well, what's wrong, Dad?" And he's like, why are you crying? It's okay to cry. People cry all the time. And he's like, we cry all the time. And he says, because he had a lot of brothers. You feel he doesn't have any anymore. I'm like, well, we'll be your brothers, Dad. I'm like, oh, that's so adorable. And it was really sad how that played out. And he fortunately did have kind of a happy ending. He started a new business in Hawaii and had, kids and grandkids. And even Carrie, his daughter, ended up growing up and becoming a wrestler as well. And both of Kevin's sons became tag team wrestlers as well. So there's kind of a happy ending there. But happy in terms of, if you know the story, they don't tell you that that's what happened to the rest of the family. But it is just incredibly sad. And to Alexander's point, it's not really, it doesn't seem like it's interested in telling the Von Erich story as accurately as it could have. It's like hence why it says inspired by. But it's a family drama that just happens to be focused on a wrestling family and this epic tragedy, if you will, which again does put a lot more of the blame on the father's shoulders than perhaps is warranted. Because again, at any time in all of those years, they could have stood up to him and said something to see what would happen. I get why that's obviously hard to do at times, but once they're moved out of the house and living on their own, because another thing we find out is that the father was stealing money from Kevin. He's like, hey, man, I've been looking at the books, and we're not getting paid nearly as much as we've been making. He's like, well, what, you think you're just living here free? And it's like, well, aside from, what would be reasonable room and board for living on the ranch, you're still taking an excessive amount of money from us. So it's like you're just, kind of like the Colonel was just scamming Elvis all the time, or other kids will try and get emancipated from their parents as child stars because they find that they're just stealing all their money from them. And he's like, Dad, you said it's all about wrestling, all about family. We're going to be the best in all this stuff, and yet you're just stealing from us. And it's kind of puts an even sadder type twist on it. And again, I'm not sure if that was something that actually happened. Was he actually stealing money from them? I don't know. But it is like incredible. It's a drama that just happens to be focused on wrestling and is really sad. But I thought it was an excellent film.
I enjoyed the film a lot as well, Catherine. And I would recommend the film to anyone who is interested in seeing what I think is a very interesting take on, as I said, a film that acknowledges their accomplishments, but also many of the tragedies on this particular family. And also, I did think that the scenes in the ring were good as far as I'm concerned. It looked quite authentic. It looked like wrestling as I remember it from the 80s. The cast and this crew did such a great job of recreating it, as we've heard from some people in the chat, as well as the family themselves. And I think that they would have been it would have been very difficult for them to portray every single truth of the family in this film. And they chose not to do that for I guess a number of reasons. But for what it is to get a wrestling film like this, for myself as someone who, as I said, does not follow professional wrestling, it was an entertaining film, however heavy it was. And I think it needed to be heavy. It couldn't necessarily be too cheerful and upbeat, because of the pressures, in addition to everything, the mental and physical pressures that these young men had to deal with, which was just not measurable. um I think they did a good job of showing us what they wanted to show us, but you do get this sense of the pressure, and you feel that pressure in the film. I think they have interesting imagery to show it, um, in subtle ways, Catherine, as you mentioned, in some scenes where we see the pressure that's put on them. And of course, we're introduced to it, as I said in the beginning, when the father explains that there's a ranking about who's his favorite. And,
The
it's
rankings can always change. Deliberately trying to create a competitive spirit in the sons, so that way it's almost like it's kind of like you're getting them ready for, this is the type of lifestyle he wants them to have. He wants them to be really competitive and stuff, and that's why he's kind of dogging on Michael a lot, because Michael's just kind of into music, whatever. And like when David walks in the kitchen and the mom's like, David, pants, wear them tomorrow morning when you come out of bed. And they're saying, and it's the rankings thing. It's like, okay, you're already doing this whole competitive thing. And I did like that they mentioned at the end that they live on that Kevin and his wife and kids and grandchildren all live on a ranch. Kind of like when they were living on the ranch, he thought it was great because they were living together as a family, only to find that the dad's just using it as an excuse to take money from him. Whereas, Kevin and his family are doing it because, they care about each other and all that. It's not just about, can we get more titles? But again, to Alexander's point, that there's a lot more at play here that they didn't cover. It's like they had an idea of the type of story they want to tell, the type of family pressures of trying to live up to your parents, live up to your father. And it just happened to be that, oh, you look at this story, this epic tragedy of sorts, which you would be forgiven if you read the true story and thought, oh, that can't be real. It's too crazy. And they just used that as kind of the backdrop to tell this tragic family drama. And as tragic as it was, I could picture myself watching this movie several more times, because I like that it gives you all those feelings and stuff. Like, that's what great movies do.
I agree, Catherine. And I also do, as I said before, they chose to not go necessarily the cliche way all the times. You talked about this kind of off-camera shot of the mother, that she's not in frame with the father because she's not with him anymore. Like there's so much you can kind of read into a
That's
lot.
right. They did divorce shortly after. So like I think it was 92 or so. So that marriage didn't survive that.
And I love that they play with that in this film, and we do get this sort of fresh perspectives of that throughout the film, and still the excitement. I do remember the 80s and, going to different events, and, how typically the clothing that you would wear going to something like the Sportatorium, or whether it was that or Carnival or whatever it is, that's exactly how we dressed. So it does bring back a lot of really good memories. And I want to say hello to Darth Plato, as well as JH Edits, who says, I felt like this was the best Zac Efron has ever been. What do you think, Catherine?
Oh, 100%. Like, yeah, that's easy. Hands down, his best performance in a movie.
Yeah, and I always knew he was very talented, but I've never seen a performance like this from him. And certainly there's a lot more that I think Zac Efron and the other actors in this film have to offer, Catherine. What are your final thoughts on this incredible film, Iron Claw?
It's my third favorite of the year, behind John Wick 4 and Oppenheimer. I think it's very good. I'm not sure if it's made any of the shortlists for the awards season. It should. I think it's a very excellent movie, one of A24's better ones in a long time. I think everybody did a great job, like, bulking up for the parts. And Holt McElhaney was another great performance in this film, playing the father. I thought he was really great. Not as many people are talking about that, but I thought he was fantastic. And again, it kind of reminds me of the movie The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke, which, yeah, that movie's about wrestling too, but it's also kind of a drama about this guy who's, washed up and can he come back? And it just happens to be about wrestling. That happens to be his thing. Likewise, this is a family drama. And admittedly, given the amount of changes they made, should they have changed the names of the family and everybody? Maybe. Like Alexander was saying, Ric Flair's portrayal was just awful. And it's like, okay, I admittedly didn't watch all those stuff back then, so I can't really speak to it one way or another, but it's like, okay. And I did find that scene interesting too, where after Rick wins the belt, he comes back into the locker room where the dad's there trying to console the sons. And for a second, I was thinking there was going to be some type of trash talk, but it's like, no, kind of like realistically, there's a lot of competition when you're in the ring, but they're friends and friendly with each other when they're outside of the ring. They're not. There's no reason to be, not want to kill you. Kind of like they said in NASCAR, Dale Earnhardt, they called him the Intimidator because he was terrifying on the track, but he would be the first person to come down to victory lane to congratulate whoever won the race.
Yeah,
like, you can be super competitive in the ring or on the track, but then be great friends outside of that.
Yeah, he was almost kind of like, Kevin, you silly guy, you messed up, you lost, and you could have won it, buddy. You want to go for a beer? It was very chummy, and it was, even Zac Efron's, portrayal of Kevin at that point with the brother and the son, the brother and the father looking at Zac Efron, and they're not happy with him and they just walk out. Like it's so good, Catherine. I think there's a lot that's being said in this film without words, and just incredible writing and incredible performances. This production team and cast need to be congratulated. I love the film as well. JH Edis says the emotion he brought was top notch. And we have another super chat from Alexander Wilson before we end the show for a $5 super chat. Thank you so much, Alexander. So generous tonight. We appreciate it. Says, Kevin did recently publicly say that their father was not the reason for his brother's death. He said it was drugs and physical issues that did it. And now that was the two themes that I thought, Catherine, that you couldn't escape from any film about wrestling during that time period, and maybe even this time period, is the incredible pressure, physical and mental pressure on wrestlers, and the exposure, if not use, of drugs. And, I think that for an ordinary person watching this, they do see that, but there was a lot of emphasis in the film, this pressure that the father put on the boys as well.
Yeah, and that's why I was wondering what kind of drove the director, Sean Durkin, to do that, because I was familiar enough with the story to know, again, with Carrie, it was largely, the drug addiction and the stints in jail and all that kind of stuff. Whereas with Michael, it was his condition and the prognosis was not looking good and he just didn't want to live like that. And with Chris, it was the same thing. He just had that, granted Chris isn't in the movie, but it was the same kind of thing where he's constantly breaking all his bones and this is not a way to live. And yeah, the father, and even though Kevin said that, yes, the father was portrayed, like his personality was portrayed accurately, like, yes, he did try and push his sons into doing it, but that doesn't mean you're the thing you're going to go to is, oh, I guess I'll shoot myself. No, logically what would happen is you would confront the father before, you would off yourself. So yeah, Kevin, of course, is right. It's not, the father did not push them into killing themselves, and that seemed to, or, all these other things that happened, and that seemed to be some type of conscious decision, like the story that he was trying to tell, because we've heard of other, again, famous families where the dad or whatever is trying to push them into being famous at the expense of, their happiness or whatever. It's like, did you do this for us or did you do this for you? Because you're trying to live through us type of thing. And yeah, there might be an element to that, to the Von Erichs and the dad wanting them to be wrestlers, but that's a completely different thing than pushing them and causing them to, want to end their lives. And so, and like you mentioned, drugs and steroids were big back then in the 80s. There's a whole lengthy list of wrestlers who did die young of those types of things. And there was still debate to this day about what exactly brought on David's enuresis death. So, and that's another thing. What role did genetics play in depression? Who knows? We don't, because we're never going to know. And so for the movie to put it all on the father's shoulders, it's like, no, it's not really, because again, that goes back, if you want to tell that story and have that be the reason, then you need to change the names and maybe pick a different profession to get the point across, because obviously, if it was still professional wrestling, people would be like, "Hey, this sounds kind of like the Von Erichs." but if you want to tell that story, then either put it all in there or at least all of it in the sense that it's still an accurate representation of the truth. Because obviously, you have to, when you're adapting a life story into a movie, you have to make concessions. You have to composite events, composite characters, or compress events, composite characters, things like that. But the movie was just pushing this really mostly false narrative because it's leaving out that huge other aspect that you were talking about that had a lot to do with wrestling, particularly in the 80s and the 90s, that they just didn't dive into for whatever reason.
Absolutely, Catherine. And I do want to thank you for joining me tonight. Um, for this review. It's been so much fun talking about this film. This film is exceptional. As JH Edit says, Moira Tyranny was fantastic as well. Absolutely. Catherine, where can people find you?
You can find me at Sly Snide, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd. You could find me on the Virtual Cantina Network. Have a show that streams every second and fourth Sunday of the month at 8 a.m. Pacific called The Unifying Force. It's a Star Wars talk show, and where we talk about philosophy and other real-world concepts mixed with Star Wars. And then you can also find me currently every Thursday night at 7 Pacific on the Phantasmagorium Show YouTube channel, reviewing Fargo, the movie TV show with Scotty R37. We have a lot of fun there. We're currently reviewing season 5 and having a blast. So come check us out there. We got a bunch of other playlists for Tarantino Rodriguez reviews, James Bond reviews, Batman, Spider-Man reviews, Indiana Jones reviews. We have a lot of fun over there. So check us out.
It sounds fantastic, guys. Please do check out Catherine. Her contact information is right here on the screen. And do make sure you check it out and subscribe. Guys, you can always find me here on Positive Fandom as well as on the Burnettwork and my new channel, Roman Empire Matters. I want to thank everybody in the chat, including Alexander Wilson, who's so generous for the super chats. We so appreciate your commentary and your contributions to the channel. And everybody who hasn't seen the film, go and see this film. You won't be disappointed. It's a fantastic film, and hopefully we continue to get more films like this in the future for 2024. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching, who's watching on the replay. And guys, remember, no matter where you are out there, always remember to please be kind. Take care, everybody.